Okay, so I just posted 8 minutes of video where my microphone wasn't working, which is kind of embarrassing, but it is what it is. I am back. Now, I'm going to try and do this all over again. And if you want to listen to the first version of this, if it's still posted when you see this, you can just kind of pretend that I'm like the Muppets, just kind of talking. So it's the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. I hope you had a wonderful holiday if you're the one kind of person who celebrates it. We had a great one here. And it's a special day for a couple of reasons. In 11 days, I screwed up the count in the last video. In 11 days, my new lit RPG zombie apocalypse story comes out on all formats, Audible, Kindle, and print. So I'm here to kind of talk about that and talk about other stuff. And also, it's the day after Christmas, and that's cool. So I wanted to talk about characters today. Before I do that, this is also the first video, live video, that I've done streaming to TikTok as well. I haven't had live streaming privileges over there up until like a couple of months ago, and this is the first time that I've gotten my shit together to stream there live. So if you are watching this on TikTok, welcome to the shit show. And I would just kind of advise you that I'm not sure if I can see the comments. Apparently, integrating with TikTok comments is a pain in the ass, and I don't know what I'm doing with TikTok. I'm trying to get my live chat up over on TikTok as well on my phone, so people can I can read the comments on my phone at the same time. So, not sure that that's going to work, but we'll see. So I am super duper excited about. Hey! I found myself. That's exciting. Let's see. Can I see my comments? There. I did it. I am useful for something. So anyway, if you're on TikTok, there apparently is a bit of a lag. So if you comment on TikTok, I won't actually see the comment for a little bit. So bear with me. Feel free to ask your questions twice if you need to, and I'll get to you as best I can. Ryan, I'm glad you're excited. I'm so nervous and so excited for the release of the new book because it's, all new characters. It's an all new story. I got like a lot invested into it. I've poured my heart and soul into this thing, and it's taken months and months and months of work to write this book, right? So I'm super excited for my little baby to go out into the world. And I hope people receive it positively. The feedback that I've gotten on it outside of publication has been largely really positive. So I'm optimistic. But more on that book later. The big thing that I wanted to talk about tonight was characters, how I kind of come at characters and how they kind of operate in my story and how I kind of design them. Because one of the things that people say about me in my writing and my reviews is that I have kind of grounded and realistic characters. They're interesting. They're not just like cookie cutter stereotypes down the line. So that's a huge compliment to get as a writer. And I wanted to kind of talk about that for a second. The inception of a character comes with me alongside kind of the setting and the inciting incident. So I write a lot of science fiction. Hey, Max. I write a lot of science fiction and fantasy with, kind of horror elements mixed in. And in order for me to imagine a story, I have to imagine the setting, right? Like, am I talking like science fiction? Are we on a spaceship? Are we on an alien planet? Are we in a mundane world, but weird stuff's going on? And once I kind of have that sort of background setting idea, the inciting incident kind of plays into that, right? Like, if we're in modern day, is it something science fiction-y? Is it something evil? Is it something good? Is it something wondrous? And once I kind of have that spark, I then, parallel to that, kind of come up with a character that I can pair with it that will be interesting to watch, grow, and experience those things. So, if it's a wondrous thing, maybe having a character that's a bit of a curmudgeon, experience those things, and watching them get pulled out of their shell and grow as a person is interesting. So it's important for me to kind of develop those two things parallel. A lot of the horror writers that I hang out with and associate with, and I know a lot of horror writers, they frequently come up with a character first and they like fully develop a whole character. But I think a lot of horror writing by definition happens in modern day, right? So they don't have to do a lot of the background sort of world building that I force myself to do because I write outside of the normal world a lot. So that's kind of how I come at it a little differently. From that point, when I'm thinking of a character, I often lean into their flaws and the things that they struggle with, because in my mind, watching someone who's already really successful at something like deal with problems is kind of, it's not that interesting, you know? Like a lot of the stories that I have read inside the zombie apocalypse and post-apocalyptic genre, the characters that are like prepped and ready to go with a ton of skills and a ton of equipment sail through the problem and don't need to deal at all in the same way as like Joe Schmo from Kokomo, who's got like, you know, a tin can opener and that's all he's got. Hey, Kiowa. Feel free to ask questions, by the way. Anybody can just toss questions at me. I'm happy to answer them as I go. I like my characters to be flawed and I like them to struggle because that's way more interesting to me. It's way more interesting to write, and I think it's way more interesting to read and to listen to. Going through some of my big characters in my stories, the majority of people who have read or heard my writing have experienced it through Adrian's Undead Diary, which is my big Zompoc post-apoc series, which book 16 comes out soon. Adrian, at the start of the story, is working a third shift job that he doesn't really want to do. It's not that interesting. He has a degree he doesn't want. He's in a relationship that's kind of, you know, blasé, going through the motions. You know, there's like interest but not passion. And then, you know, the world ends and he's got to kind of figure out, you know, A, how to survive, and then B, how to actually find a way to be happy, right? And how do you be happy in you know, the apocalypse? And coming into it with that sort of mindset, coupled with the fact that the dude's a vet and has some like low-key PTSD and, you know, kind of some anger issues, it puts him in a position where he's going to be making a lot of mistakes, and then he can learn from those mistakes. And that's just like more interesting to me to write. And if you look through all of my stories, the prevailing amount of characters are messed up in some way. So going down the line, Diggory Finch from The Darkness of Diggory Finch. Diggory's got like mental health issues, right? He's dealing with depression and anxiety and ADHD, and he's medicated for it. And he has like parents that were kind of absentee and a dad that was really sketchy, and he moved like 30 times and has trouble making friends and can't hold down a job that's, you know, worth anything. And he's like a really smart guy, but just can't get it together. And when all of this money is thrown in his lap and he's given like this crazy amount of stability in his life, he still doesn't know what to do with it, right? Like, you know, he's the dog that caught the car, right? So, you know, okay, now what? And that is a way more exciting story than a dude who's just got his life together or her life together, who just like inherits money and is like, oh, cool, I'll pay off all my debt and, you know, all my problems go away. Like, here's a guy who's got a whole bunch of money and then is like, I'm going to buy gum, you know? So, you know, that's Diggory's aspect of it. Ryan, you have a question. Do you make changes to your story based off how the character would handle it? Or do you force the character into the path of the story? I'm going to put that up so people can see it. Do I change the story based on how the character would handle it? Yes, I think both of those answers are correct, because sometimes how a character will handle it determines how the story will pan out, right? So, you know, some characters will meet a threat with violence. Some characters will meet betrayal with retreat. So depending upon how I need the story to move on, I will choose one or the other. Like, do I run them into it and then see what happens? Or do I know that something's going to happen and I know how they'll respond? The answer is yes to both of those. One of the cool things about secondary characters in my writing process is I usually have a secondary character who exists for a reason, right? They're a foil for the main character, or they're a sidekick for the main character, or they exist to move the plot along. And sometimes when those characters intersect with the story, they just become inherently more interesting. or inherently funnier, or they eat lines of dialogue that I dedicated to other people because it's just better as I'm writing it for this other character to say it. And those characters wind up growing, right? They become more interesting and more compelling. And then that's like the story changing based on the character's presence, which is like crazy fun, right? Like as a writer, I sit down and I'm trying to, put these stories out and write what I think is going to work. And then all of a sudden I find myself changing my plan on the fly and being like, oh, you know what, I'll have this guy do this. And oh, what if he picks this up? Or what if she goes over here? And what if this person gets jealous of this person instead of this person? And you play around with those sort of, tangent possibilities. And one of them is just inherently better in my head. And that's when the story kind of takes on a life of its own, which is, when writers are talking about like, oh, I kind of, it went crazy and I lost control of it, or I had a character, do something that I didn't want them to do. Like that's what we're talking about, right? So, flawed main characters, right? We talked about Adrian, we talked about Diggory, the Elmoran, the Dark Fantasy trilogy, the twins. They're kind of country bumpkins in a dark fantasy setting. They live in a very small town. They have very low skill sets, and they're kind of pulled into the world stage when their village is swept up in the beginning acts of a fairly substantial war with a nearby nation that has quite evil intentions, and having them come from like very simple beginnings and then be thrust onto this world stage really quickly, that they're flawed, right? They're not capable. They don't have the experience. And again, they're intelligent characters. They think for themselves and they have some gifts that they need to bring to play. But by not starting them off with a mountain of abilities, they have so much more room to grow and evolve, which is really, really fun to write. In the Tesser series, I do take it in the different direction, right? So the Reemergence series is modern day urban fantasy. The main characters are dragons. The main character is a dragon, right? Like Tesser, the name of the book is a dragon. And Tesser is, for all intents and purposes, immortal, right? He's a dragon in this setting. The dragons live forever. They're basically indestructible. Like very few things can harm them. Almost nothing can kill them. So you have this like alpha male dragon dude as the main character, and his flaws are relatively minor, right? Like he starts the book not knowing how to communicate with people because he's been asleep for so long. He doesn't have language in the same way, right? Like the last time he was dealing with humans, we were in mud huts, right? So he starts off not being able to integrate, not knowing how to like communicate with people in even really simple ways. He doesn't understand modern technology. He doesn't know how to integrate with these things. We're doing magic on a completely different level than the stuff he's familiar with. So that's his flaw, right? Even though he's perfect and can't be killed, he doesn't know how to just be normal. And that's fun to play with. And when you're talking about how do you like test a character like that, the old adage is, how do you threaten Superman, right? How do you threaten Superman? You put Lois Lane near him. You put the staff of the Daily Planet in danger, and that's exactly what happens in Tesser. He winds up building relationships with mortal people and mortal monsters and stuff, and winds up having to figure out how to keep them safe, because even though he might not be able to be killed, the consequences for having people he cares about killed are there, right? So again, flawed character. Colony Lost, my military science fiction character, there's a big cast of characters in that, and I'm not going to name them all, but it's like a bunch of colonial marines who are exploring an alien planet that in theory is safe, but it's not. And they are all flawed in their own way, but on a slightly, micro level. They're not dominating the storyline. There's a couple of Marines that feature front and forward, and their kind of struggles are, inexperience or trying to build a family and don't know how to, and that kind of stuff. So that's, the flawed aspects of characters are super interesting to me, and I try to write around that. Okay, Bob, I'm going to answer your question, Bob. You love the AUD series. Thank you. Best zombie series by far. I appreciate that. The characters you created are amazing. The story is perfectly original. Thank you. Is there 15 or 16 books so far? So thank you for all those compliments. That's awesome. I appreciate it. I will sleep better tonight because of them. Currently, there are 15 core books in the series. There's also the 7-book parallel series, Tales from the World of AUD. And those are, they intersect with the main books and kind of fill in the blanks. So the core series is 15. I am writing the 16th book right now. I'm further behind on it than I would like to be, mainly because it's the end of the series. It's the end of a series that's the Adrian's March period of the book. So the first 8 books are what I call the core storyline, and they conclude with the events of book 8, Cassie. And then the second 8 books are called the Adrian's March storyline, and the 8th book of that is the conclusion of that story arc, right? So it'll be the end, just like it was the end at the end of Cassie. And then the series is going to get parked for a while because I have too many other projects going on. And quite frankly, I just need a break from Adrian. I love writing that dude. I love writing his situation, but 16 books on, plus 7 more on the side, plus Carl Meadows' Loki trilogy, which is, canon in the universe. It's a ton of continuity to keep in my head. And there are so many characters and so many plot lines and so many subplots and so many things I need to pay off that writing AUD has become quite a struggle. It takes me way longer than it used to because there's just so much. And I've trimmed the cast down dramatically and focused the story quite a bit the last 3 or 4 books to make it easier. And it's still really hard because in book 16, if you're not following the series, Adrian is trying to get to family. And those characters have been like orbiting him storyline wise for 8 or 9 books now. And now he's meeting them. So even though I shrunk the cast's about to get bigger. Here we are. So book 16 should be out in the next couple months. I don't have a firm date on it. And that's where we're at for that. So Ryan, why do you think your female characters are so well grounded compared to others in your genre? Thanks. I'm not sure how much of a compliment that is coming from a dude, but thanks. I appreciate that. Why are my female characters grounded? I would like to say that I don't use women as plot devices as much as a lot of other authors do, especially in the genres that I write in. Oftentimes female characters are just used as something to move the male character's story along. And I do that in some books because, sometimes that's just the way it goes. But I have written characters without a gender, so I don't write them in a gendered way. And I don't think I've told too many people that. So this might be the first time people are hearing that, which is cool. For example, the Dry Earth trilogy, which I've only wrote 2 books of, shame on me. The main character, Yasmin, I did not write as feminine. I did not gender Yasmin until I was like 3/4 of the way through the book. And I was like, yep, definitely going to be a female character. And then I went in, fixed all the pronouns, but didn't change any body references, right? I did not make her female. I just allowed her to become female. I didn't make her female. And as a result, she wasn't written in a way that would incline her to behave in a way that people would have preconceived as a gender or not. And that was helpful to making a character that was just authentic to the experiences, right? As opposed to saying like, oh, she would have been emotional or oh, he would have been macho. It's just a person, right? And I've written several other characters that way too, especially female characters that are put into situations that are challenging and really difficult and sort of out of the norm for what a lot of female characters are put through. And I make my female characters strong. I make them bold, I make them brave. I make them tough. And spare me the sanctimonious BS. I will stop reading if you keep this 2 + 2 = 5 nonsense. Dude, I don't even know what that means. I'm going to show your comments so other people can judge you. I don't even know what that means. If you want to shit on me in a live chat, you got to come at me with more details because right now you just sound like you're lost and trying to troll, which is possible. Maybe you're just trying to troll. If so, try harder. Anyway, so the female characters are strong, and I model them around female characters that are in the real world, right? Like I have female friends that are just like strong and smart and educated, and they don't take shit, and they're not wallflowers. And I look at them and I think, God, they're amazing. My wife is one of them. My wife just kicks total ass, and she's tough and she takes no shit. And, amongst the two of us, she is the bulldog, right? Like I'm the nice guy who's very polite and, slow moving. And my wife will just kick in the door like Van Damme and just like drop the fucking hammer on people. And those are women that really exist in the real world. And I think that a lot of writers don't write women like that because maybe they're afraid. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. But Ryan, that answers your question, I hope. Baylor, what's a good book about a dog covered in peanut butter? I'm going to go with I don't know. I don't think I've read any. But thanks. Mackenzie, longtime fan. Started Dark Recollections at a low time. Never had so much fun. That's awesome. Thank you for saying that. Got you through it. Put many friends onto the series. Thank you. If you were to make a movie show of any of your works, which do you pick, and would it be live action or animated? So to answer your question, I don't care what would get made because anything getting made would be awesome. I've talked about it a few times on other lives, but Adrian's was, we were right on the doorstep of a TV deal, but it fell through at the last minute because Warner Brothers and Discovery merged. And our deal got tabled, and then everyone who was attached to the series to work on it had to go work on other jobs because the show couldn't get made. So Adrian's would be the dream because it's such a long series and theoretically would get like a really big opportunity to be on the screen, multiple seasons, that whole thing. But the reality of it is like anything getting made would be cool. I've had rights inquiries on several other titles and stuff, but nothing's ever come of it. And I still have connections in Hollywood that, I talk to periodically, but right now streaming services are weird. And, Netflix is now trying to buy up Warner Brothers, who just merged with Discovery. So, lots of stuff is just kind of up in the air. And I don't sell enough books to hit bestseller lists all the time. It takes a really good day or a really good week for me. To hit a nice high sales number, and the stuff that gets picked up for shows is the stuff that's perennially in the bestseller lists. So for me to get a deal, I need to find a lot of help. And the folks that I had working on a show for AUD were huge fans, big supporters of the show, and knew a lot of the right people. And we were in the yes meeting, and we got to know. So, but that's the difference between Hollywood and publishing. In publishing, you get told no, right? The first word you hear is no, or no, we're not interested, or no, thank you. And you hear that 100 times, right? Nope, 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 nope. And then you get one yes, and you get a contract and your book goes out, right? Hollywood's the exact opposite. When you're talking to all these people, they're like, yes, that's exciting. Yes, I want to do it. Yes, let's get a writer. Yes, let's get a producer. Yes, 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 yes. And you just start collecting all these yeses, and you get so friggin' excited. And like the phone calls I've had with people would like blow your mind, right? And you get to the final meeting where, the person who controls the money writes the check and they say no, and that's it. So you get one no, TV show's dead. Whereas with publishing, you collect 1,000 no's until you get a yes, and then you get a book series. So Wendy, thank you. A post about all the research. Yeah, the research stuff. I think you're talking about Erfurt, Germany, which is a city that I've never been to, but I have researched an excessive amount because a whole bunch of the AUD story appears in and around Erfurt. And I do a ton of research. Like I joke with people that like 50% of my writing time is just research to make sure that the stuff that I'm writing about is authentic or comparable, so that's where that's at. For example, like one of the things that I joke about is in the Dry Earth trilogy, my YA series, a cell phone tower is a significant part of the plot. And I had to do I don't know, like a week's worth of research on how cell phone towers work. How are they powered? How do they function? How do they broadcast? How are they physically laid out? All of those things. So I knew exactly how they worked going into it. I was calling cell phone guy, I was calling Verizon and being like, totally not a terrorist, y'all, but how do your cell phone towers work? And I talked to techs on the phone, and I had a lot of conversations. And this is before I even wrote the story, before I wrote page one. But I knew that going into it, I had to have that idea work. And like I said, I don't even know how many hours it was, but it was probably a full week of research just on how cell phone towers work. And paid off, right? Like I was able to write a clear, concise storyline. And like the cell phone stuff only showed up in like three chapters, but it works and it's legit. And if you know anything about cell phone towers, it's close enough to write that it works. But that's the research stuff. So Wendy, you're welcome for the strong female characters thing. I'm doing the best I can. Oiden, YouTube won't let you say what you mean. Okay, we'll work with what you got and then get back to me. Sob X, love AUD. Listen to the audiobook 6 times. Thank you. The audiobook for that series is pretty amazing. James Foster, the first narrator for the series, he's a fantastic narrator. It breaks my heart that he left the series, but it is what it is. You're not trolling. All right. Yay. So glad. I'm so glad you're a big fan. I'm glad you're here. And yeah, I could use AI to make my own show. I have moral issues with using AI for stuff like that because as a person who is creative and who makes their living trying to be creative, I get really uncomfortable around the idea of like using the technology to replace talented creators that I want to work with. It makes me feel weird. The other thing about it is the best stuff I've worked on and written and been a part of was made so much better by working with other talented creative people and bouncing ideas off them and getting inspired by them and having conversations about what works and what doesn't work. And I think creating in a bit of a vacuum with AI wouldn't give me that experience, and I'd be afraid that I would just kind of like tunnel vision something that isn't as good as it could be as if I was working with other people. So Ryan, who is the character that gets you the most excited to write? Right now, Seth in the Undead Glitch. Like nothing's even close to it. I'm so jazzed about that dude and that story. Like I wish I was writing right now. But prior to that, Diggory was a lot of fun to write. I follow the dopamine when I'm writing. Like whatever story I'm most excited about is the one that is easiest to write. So Seth is really, really big right now. The Tesser series with the Reemergence, there's 5 books in it, and each book bounces between a dragon that's in the universe, and that's great because you get to see the whole universe, but it also means that I don't get to sit with one character as like the main voice, which was really fun to write, but also like kind of tough to write because, if you really liked the dragon in book 1, Tesser, and then you go to book 2 and it's Tesser's brother, Ambrin, who's a totally different dragon, it could be a letdown. So, maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. Lyndall, you do good work, man. Thanks. If I was rich, I would write a check today. If I was rich, I would still take your check because money is awesome. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe TV will happen. Maybe a movie will happen. Maybe it won't. I write books. I don't make TV shows. So I'm going to keep writing books, and hopefully I don't get put out of a job by AI, which could happen. But thank you for the offer. And Sobex, yes, James was a great narrator. He's still a great narrator. He just does different stuff, and he doesn't work for me anymore. So Michelle, Undead Glitch is amazeballs. I am so glad you said that because you're one of the few people who have been able to read the whole first draft of the book on my Patreon. Cue me shilling for my Patreon because I post everything as I'm writing it over there. So I'm behind on posts right now because of the holidays, but I'm probably 30 or 40,000 words into the new AUD book, and I'm going to start posting that stuff rapid fire. So you'll be a third of the way into the book long before it releases, which is fun. So, but I'm glad you liked it, Michelle. It was really, really fun uh, to write that book. Like I said, I'm excited to go back and to write it. I have so many awesome ideas for books 2 and beyond. About 4 are what I'm hoping for right now, but we'll see how the public receives it. Because if if it doesn't do well, it'll be hard to write more in the series. Cameron, what's the broad strokes process for creating a story? Start at the end, beginning, plot board. I've talked about this before a few times, and the way I write it, I was talking earlier in this live about how if it's a whole new story, I start with kind of the setting and the world building piece because my science fiction fantasy stuff require me to create a setting, right? Parallel to that, I come up with a character to put in that setting to do stuff to move the story along. So that's kind of where I start. Once I have that, from there, I take that idea and I arc out a beginning, a few middle points, and an end, right? Because I know what I'm starting at and I kind of know where the finish line is. And like, oh, wouldn't this be a great ending for the story? And then I have a couple of scenes or a couple of moments in between. And that's like my loose outline. Usually at that point, I have a couple of NPCs, like non-main characters, to kind of sprinkle in at certain points that I know that'll be important or fun or interesting or scary. I usually have some kind of a villain, or if there's no villain, there's some kind of like threatening incident that they, some kind of threat that they have to deal with, and I develop that. But I don't outline too much because the story changes while I write. So those little moments in between I call islands, and I just start island hopping, right? I go from the beginning and I find the first island, and then I write from point A to point B. And then I have a better idea of how to then get from point B to point C. And as I'm moving down the line, I know where my finish line is, right? I know how I want this book to end approximately. And I just keep going until I get there. And yeah, stuff changes. Sometimes I'll write, when I get to spot D, I realize, well, shit, I can spit. I can skip these 5 different things. And just jump all the way up to M because the other stuff is boring and taking too long to develop. So that's kind of how I do it. It's a loose outline. I give myself the room to be flexible and to kind of be creative as I go. So that's my broad strokes process. It works most of the time. Ebo, AI will never replace human creativity. Keep at it. Love AUD. Love the main series. Oh, you come back to it every year. I hear that a lot, which is kind of amazing that people keep rereading and keep re-listening, because it's weird for me to think that people enjoy it so much to go back to it. I have a naturally self-deprecating inclination that people will read it and be like, cool, and then move on to the next thing, which is enough for me, right? Like, that's exciting to just have people just read it the one time. But the idea that people go back, is just like, Wendy, what would be your advice to a new writer who has an outline but is struggling with whether it should be first person or a narrative? Okay, so that's a specific question. You have your outline, but should it be first person? Okay, so the way I would approach that question would be to think if the story would be better if the reader had insight into what the main character was thinking. If you want the reader to hear their thoughts and their deliberation and the process that they're going through as the events are happening to them, then you immediately step into first person narrative, right? Because then as they're talking, you can insert their thought dialogue in a much more natural state. If you want the reader or listener to not necessarily know what they're thinking, then you jump out and do third person. Tenses are obviously a second question, but I know when I'm writing in a first person sort of way, I'm doing it specifically so I can talk inside their head on the page and have it be a part of the natural story. Adrian's is almost all first person, except for the side fictions and short stories that get inserted purposefully. Glitch is the same thing, same idea where he's talking to you. And it's great because you're inside his head. You hear all of his thoughts, you hear all of his worries, you hear all of his fears and his excitements. And that's the difference, I think, between what you're asking. So my advice would be think about whether or not you want the story to be particularly insightful and inside that character's head or outside watching them deal with those things. And then I think you have your answer. You're welcome, Cameron. Keep looking. This is a LGBTQ safe space. Yes, it is. We are very welcoming of those neighbors here. Um, it's very important for me to welcome everybody. So, Ryan, Elmoran is still one of my favorite worlds you have built. Thank you. I love Elmoran. Do you think that with Glitch you will explore it more, or will you make my dreams come true and revisit the twins with a new book? My distinct hope is that one day I can return to the world of Elmoran in any fashion because I have so much of that world created. For those of you who don't know, Elmoran is a fantasy world that I created. You can read about it in the Kinless trilogy, which came out 12 years ago, something like that. Awesome setting, really cool, really flavorful, very dark. It's got evil undead monsters and all different kinds of stuff. And I was developing it as a role playing game back when I worked in game development, and it never happened, but I kept all the content. And I have like 400,000 words of world building there. So I have this massive treasure trove of world. And the Kinless trilogy didn't really tear it up, didn't really do great. But it was also like some of the first stuff I wrote, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But I love the world. And with Undead Glitch, I have the ability to world hop with Seth, the main character, because he's inside a virtual reality environment. So he's physically inside an environment, and they have like nanites that they put inside his nervous system that affect how he perceives this environment as long as he's inside it. So he sees himself as surviving a zombie apocalypse, even though he's just inside this gray liminal space. He can join other games and other worlds and other universes, and they just load in new software essentially. And I have decided that if I do decide to take him into a fantasy experience, which I would really like to do in future books, I'm going to put it right into Elmoran because I have all the maps, I have all the artwork, I have all the NPCs and characters and all that stuff fleshed out. So it would be super easy for me to drop that in. And if people read or listen to Undead Glitch, really like the Elmoran setting, I've got 3 other books they can check out. So, I think each series can scratch each other's back and it'd be really fun. One of my side dreams would be to somehow return to continuing to develop Elmoran for publication as a role playing game. And with Drive Through RPG now, which is the indie game release company, it wouldn't be too hard. So, Wendy, thanks. I'm glad that advice was helpful. So go with it, try. You can always, if you have the time to invest in it, write a chapter one way and then write the same chapter the other way and see which one you like. That's a lot of the writing process. When I'm writing, I never scrap things. Like I never just, backspace it out. But if I write it and I don't like it, it goes into a separate document and gets saved, right? Because there's usually something about it that has a redeeming quality. But I'll write it one way and then read it and be like, that doesn't hit the way I want it to. Or this character is not featuring prominently enough, or it's not scary enough or funny enough or whatever. But yeah, like the only way to find out is to write it, right? And kind of see how it feels. So much of this gig is just how does the writing it make you feel, right? Like I joke around that if I'm writing it and I'm enjoying writing it, or if I write a sad part and I feel sad, or if I write a happy part and I feel happy, if I feel it, the reader or the listener will too. And that's proven true time and time and time again, where people reach out to me about the series that hit me emotionally writing it, and it hits them the same way. So I know when I'm writing, if I'm not feeling what I should be feeling or what I want the reader or the listener to feel, I'm not doing it right. And I got to go back to it. But the only way to do that is to go through the motions and see if it works. So Unus Mundus has been great interactive. That's a bad sentence, but I think what you're saying is the Unus Mundus page has been fun to interact with. In An Undead Glitch, The company that runs the game is called Immersive Entertainment Corporation, and the software platform that they use to power their virtual reality experience is called the Unus Mundus system, which in Latin means one world, or like main world. And I have a Facebook page that I made for Unus Mundus. And if you visit the page, it's as if you're following the company in the future and all their marketing stuff and job posts and whatnot. So if you want to experience a little bit of immersion in Seth's world, you can go to Facebook and follow the Unus Mundus page, which is, I'll put up Ryan's post so you know how to spell it. Unus Mundus. And that's Latin. Lindell. Elmoran was a lot of fun. Yes, it's a very fun series. You know, also one of the things that I doofed on Elmoran, looking back on it 10 years later, is the book covers for book 1 and book 2 are just not exciting. They're, you know, my friend Alan, who I love dearly, who's done many covers for me, those were not great covers by him, but I loved him as a friend so much. When he did it, I was so excited, I just rolled with it. The more discerning professional author who now makes a living doing this, if someone gave me that same cover now, I would be like, no, nope, no, sir. And I would want something completely different. That being said, at the time, super jazzed, did what I did. It is what it is. The third book in that series, The Echoes of Sin, has a really cool cover, like really, really cool. And I wish I could make that the book cover for the first in the series, but the image would not fit the story, and I think would be misleading to people. But it's a train at night driving through a forest, and there's vampires jumping and crawling all over it, and it just looks baller. But again, not fit for book 1. So yeah, new covers, new marketing package, I think would do wonders for that series. But the audio rights were sold to Audible Studios, and they still have the rights to it. And if I were to pull it to like fix it up and do some edits and re-release it, I would then have to re-record it, which would be quite expensive, and I'm not sure would be worth it. So what I'm going to do with that series in the future, I just don't know. I could try to sell the rights again. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm sure Tantor or Podium or Brilliance would want it, but it is what it is. As I sip my iced coffee with Kahlua. So characters, coming back to that, and keep asking questions if you want to. In An Undead Glitch, which is the book I really want to talk about here, Seth Willard is the main character. And because I like flawed characters, Seth is in kind of a tough situation at the beginning of the book. He is a single dad, and his wife is struggling with addiction issues and infidelity, and he loves her and wants to keep a stable home for his kids, his boys, but is just fighting. You know, guy's got 2 jobs, and on the side he sells plasma to help make ends meet, and he had to move in with his older sister and her family, and this takes place in the far future, and they live on a enormous ring space station orbiting Titan. So they're all cramped up on this, space station, and he's just trying to figure life out, and then finds out that he's sick. He goes to donate plasma, and they're like, yeah, so we can't take your plasma anymore because your tests are coming back that you're not healthy. And that sparks off a series of events where he's like, okay, well, now not only am I broke and theoretically single and a single dad, I now am dying. And he winds up getting pushed into applying for a job working for Immersive Entertainment Corporation, because if he can get hired by them, he gets a nanite package injected. The nanites, little robots, fill his whole body, and they attach to your nervous system and all of your systems. And while he's in the game, they have a comprehensive healthcare system running inside him, and it will cure the sickness that's killing him. And he gets a job that pays well, so he winds up befriending the right people and gets hired to do this game. But when he gets dropped into the game environment and the game starts, there's a glitch. And instead of loading in as an NPC, as a merchant, where he's working for the company and just like holding a face inside the storyline for the players who pay to play, he gets dropped in as a player, which is an unpaid position. And if he dies in the game, he gets kicked out of the game, and he needs to stay in the game long enough for the nanites to cure him. So the idea of dying now takes on a completely different level of consequence. Because again, if he dies in the game, he's going to die in the real world because he's not going to get another job doing this. And that's kind of how the game starts, how the book starts. And Seth is everyone tells Seth what to do. He's always trying to make people happy. He's always trying to help. He's always just trying to do his best. And didn't start out with a whole lot of assets, and everything that he's worked for, he's had to fight for, and he doesn't have a whole lot. But when he gets into the game, it's different. He's free. He can do whatever he wants, and he's sensible and thoughtful and becomes a natural leader. And the irony of the story is that in the real world, he's nobody that's told what to do by everybody. And in the game, he's somebody who leads other people and shows other people how to be successful and enables everyone as opposed to controlling everyone. And that's a beautiful thing for Seth to experience. And you watch him kind of come into his own and make great friendships. Ryan, you have a question. It's, what character do you wish you could bring back to the forefront of my writing? Man, I don't know. Fucking bring back to the forefront. I mean, I would like to have Diggory jump right to the front of the line next so I can write book 4 powerfully and close out that series. So I really want him to return to the forefront of my imagination again. Right now, he's kind of third in line behind Seth and Adrian, because I just wrote Seth. Now I'm writing Adrian. And then I want to go back to Yasmin. I really do. I want to finish out the Dry Earth. And then, once the Dry Earth is wrapped, once the phone is wrapped, once Diggory's wrapped, I'll possibly have time and space to do some Colony Lost stuff, which people ask for, and write Glitch, the corrupted campaign stuff. So we'll see. Returning to Glitch, inside the game, Seth makes friends, other players, and he has to keep a secret. He can't tell people. He meets a guy named Declan pretty early, who's an Irish guy who knows a lot about the game, but isn't a very good player. He doesn't have a lot of real world skills that he brings in. So he and Seth kind of link up. Seth's much more capable in terms of like what to do and how to go. Have a good night, Evo. Get some rest. Happy holidays. Declan needs Seth to survive because Declan can't do it on his own. And Seth doesn't know enough about the game to really get that competitive edge. So he needs Declan's brain, and the two of them form a really awkward sort of strangely balanced friendship because they both bring different skills to the story. And then they wind up meeting a lady named Angie, who is rocking solo. She's out and about doing her own thing, and Seth's instantly kind of attracted to her because she's pretty and she's a go-getter and she's in the game, and he's like, yeah, but I'm still married, and this woman's probably fantastically wealthy because she's paying to play, and he has this I can't even talk to her kind of vibe going on, but read the book. And then they wind up hooking up with a couple of guys named Zach and Ryan, who, if you've read or listened to Adrian, that there are a couple of guys in that story named Zach and Ryan. And these guys are not too dissimilar, which is a fun little Easter egg for Adrian fans. And he winds up working with them. And, one of them is a healer and the other one's a warrior and a tank kind of a guy. And then they bring new things to the new dynamic stuff. And one of the characters that's with him from page 1 is Sirona. And Sirona is 2 characters. The real Sirona is the nurse who works at the plasma clinic who finds out that Seth is sick. And she's the one who's like, hey, if you could get a job working for this company, all your problems kind of go away. And she kind of helps him through the process of applying and whatnot because she likes him and she wants to see him help. And then the second Serona is Seth has an AI interface built into his HUD. Like the nanites can talk to him inside his head, and he opts to make it female, the voice, and he opts to make it humorous because he can choose from a list. And he chooses to name her Serona because that was the last person who gave him a hug. So he has this real Serona and then this fictional Serona, and the Serona in the game is like a fully formed AI that he talks to. So Serona is a fun set of characters to write. And that's kind of like the main cast. There's a couple villain characters that show up in the story. I don't want to talk about them too much. I will say one of them is named Sean, which again is an Easter egg going back to AUD. The other villain is actually named after a friend of mine, and it's kind of funny because I've known him forever. He's a fantastic friend, Mike, and one of the AUD books is dedicated to him. And I wrote this character and named it after him as like a Christmas gift kind of a thing. And I had to tell him hey, good news and bad news. The good news and the bad news are the same thing, and I named a villain after you in the next book. And he was like, oh, cool. And what's the bad news? And I was like, well, the bad news is pretty awful things happen to this villain. And the villain is an awful person. But hey, it's an honor, right? And he got a kick out of it. So Sean, which is the spelling from Adrian. So yeah, so the character thing I really wanted to talk about because they're so integral to the story that that without the characters you're just writing nonfiction, I guess. And how I come about making a character I thought would be kind of interesting for people because getting inside the head of someone who creates a story you like is kind of a neat experience, right? As a younger kid, when I was reading a lot in my early teens, one of the first writers that I got hooked on, my sister showed me Stephen King. The idea that I in some way might ever be able to talk to Stephen King would have blown my mind, right? And I'm not saying I'm Stephen King, but he was a writer that I idolized. And so was, Peter Straub, Brian Lumley, Peter McCannon, a bunch of other people, Neil Gaiman, who I don't really like anymore for reasons. But the idea that I would be able to interact with that person who created a story would have blown my mind. And now that I'm kind of on the other side of that experience and people have read my stuff and enjoy it, the fact that they can talk to me is exciting for me, right? When I go to conventions or I make an appearance or I'm on a panel or at a library and someone's like, dude, I read your book, I love it, can I ask you a question? I'm like, hell yeah, you can. Because it's just exciting, I see how happy it makes people, and it's rejuvenating for me to talk to somebody who's read or listened to the stories, because hearing that outside opinion, especially from somebody who liked it, is just awesome. The joke is that if you liked an author's book, tell them, tell us that's amazing, because so much of this job is so solitary. Where I just sit in my office here, or I sit on the couch and I'm just clickety clacking away. It's nice to know, and the arc of completion on a book is extensive, right? It takes months to write a book, and you have to remain invested in the story from start to finish. And it's hard to stay motivated for that long to do anything. It's not like you work in a factory where you go in and you press the button and you stamp out a green widget, and at the end of the day you've got a giant bin of green widgets you made. You can be like, look what I did a thing, right? Or if you're working with clients or patients or doing customer service, where you get the payoff of seeing them happy or seeing them helped. With writing, I don't get anything for months. Patreon helps because people can subscribe and they can give me feedback in real time, and that's really helpful to stay motivated. But the start of a job and the end of a job is quite distant, and then actually getting paid for the job is a whole other question. So always say nice things and say shitty things too, because at least that's some kind of human contact. Lyndall, pretty excited for new AUD in the glitch. Back to building windmills. Yeah. Take pictures. Send pictures, man. I want to see what it looks like. Adulting does suck sometime. Have a great night, Lyndall. It's always good to see your face. Well, not your face, but seeing your name pop up in a chat. So yeah, that is what it is. I am excited to be finishing up Adrian. I'm happy to be paying off these storylines. So I'm also happy with Glitch because I can include so much of Adrian's story in it, because it's, Adrian's story is a zombie apocalypse, and Glitch takes place inside a zombie apocalypse setting, even though it's also like highly advanced science fiction. So being able to like overlay the two together and then use the Adrian setting and story as kind of the inspiration for what Seth experiences is like great, because I get to pull all the cool fun stuff. I don't have to worry about continuity so much, and revisit the nostalgia. Hook me up, Lyndall. So that's really cool. And again, if you've read or listened to AUD and you listen or read Glitch, you'll see the Easter eggs, right? Like the street names matter, the addresses matter, the equipment that Seth finds as he's going through the game. You'll notice a lot of similarities. Lots of situations that come up in Glitch are kind of mirrors of things that happened in Adrian. And there's like some storylines that you can kind of see developing that kind of mirror the events that happened in Adrian. So you get that like double dip experience. You get a whole new story, but you also get to go back and feel some nostalgia, which has been very fun to write, and hopefully is fun to read and listen to. And if you're still with us, I'm going to shill it one more time. Glitch is up for pre-order. You can pre-order the Kindle. You can pre-order the Audible. It's one credit. They currently have a cash value of like 30 something bucks on it, which is really high, but I think that's a non-member price. But yeah, I mean, if you want to pay cash for it, great. I make way more money, but use a credit. It's way cheaper. And those pre-order numbers matter. Like Audible sees those and knows where they want to put their advertising money. So if you are interested in pre-ordering, please pre-order. It's incredibly helpful. Ryan, I know you said you got a lot of irons in the fire. Anything you can share? I already talked about most of them. I've got, Glitch is running. AUD is wrapping up. I need to return to Diggory and finish that off. I'm also still technically attached to the Bad Wabbit series. That's the comic book series that Dead Man Walking Comics is putting out, Anthony Castro. I'm still the editor for that. He's working on book 5 and 6 right now, which I have not edited yet. And he's got his own slate of problems and projects to work on. So that kind of comes in when it happens. I think he has about 12 comics planned in the series, something like that, maybe more, maybe less. So hopefully I can stick with him through all that. It's been a really fun experience to work on comics. There's like a tiny bit of movement on an Adrian comic that I don't know what's going to come of it, but there's art made for it and it looks great and it looks cool. But I don't get too excited about those things because I just don't have any control over the art process. I can't draw those pictures. So pardon my cough. Other projects. Look around my office here. Other than hobby stuff, not much. I think that's pretty much all of it. I mentioned a while ago that I worked on a romance book that has not been released yet with a team. I was writing it with partners, and it's good and it's fun and it's cool, but it would be written and released under a pen name, and I don't want any of you to buy it because it's really important that a romance pen name only sells to people who are fans of romance. It's an algorithm thing. So we'll see what happens with that. Wendy, enjoyed all the AUD books. Can't wait for the last one. Please read The Glitch. You have 3 outlines written. Oh, that's awesome. Do it. Write it. Do it. You have nothing to lose except the time, right? Like I always tell people, writing is like clay, right? where in order to do something with clay, you have to have clay. And the only way to make a book is to put the words down, right? Once you have the book written, even if it's garbage, you then have clay that you can work with. And then in the editing process and the second draft process, you can take that raw material you made of the first draft and turn it into a book. But you can't edit something that's not written. You can't polish something that's not present. So write it. Just write it. Write a few chapters. Walk away, come back, see how you feel. Just do it, right? If it doesn't work out, whatever. At least you did it. At least you tried. I mean, that's how I started out. I said, fuck it, I'm going to do it and see what happens. And it panned out, you know. Thank you for the signed AUD book. You're welcome. Still here. New to audiobooks. Reading is challenging. Yeah. Oh, audio is like the only way that I can functionally consume a story now. I am always moving around the house. I'm writing. My eyes need to be pointed at other things pretty much from sun up to sundown. But I can have audiobooks running in the background, like when I'm doing laundry, when I'm in the car, when I'm working on stuff in the garage. I built the kids a treehouse this summer in the backyard, and the entire time I had my phone in my pocket blasting audiobooks, and it was great because, over the course of the 2 weeks that I worked on it, I was able to power through like 3 audiobooks while building a treehouse, which was terrific. Academics sucked. A little intimidated here. I'm sorry, kid. Academics, I mean, I barely made it through high school, so don't feel bad. Like, barely. Ryan, am I still doing the dice? I am, technically. I haven't made any sets in a while. I started making some dice for a lit RPG author named Troy Osgood, who actually lives kind of local to me. And we have molds and stuff, and I'm ready to make dice for him because he's probably doing a Kickstarter. But we haven't actually made anything. And that was the last set of dice that I made. I do have everything still here. It's very difficult to cast dice in cold weather. And you can't mix the resin in the house because the fumes aren't good. And so I have my dice creation station is in a workshop in the garage, and you can't pour cold resin, right? It's like taffy, so you have to warm it up. You have to do it inside the house, which I don't really like doing during the winter. And you pressurize the dice, right? You put the resin inside a pressure pot to get all the defects and the bubbles and stuff out. And my compressor is in the garage as well. So during the winter when I make dice, I have to warehouse all of my stuff here in the office. And it's like a substantial amount of stuff, all the inclusions and whatnot. But I have to mix in here, carry it out to the garage, put it in the pressure pot, level the pressure pot, pressurize the pressure pot, unhook it, and then transport the pressure pot all the way back into the house where it can be kept warm overnight because cold resin doesn't, it doesn't set up. Mold maker, nice. Word up. So it's just more difficult to do it in the winter to make dice. That being said, I love doing it. And also like just to share how much of a nerd I am with making gaming dice, I actually have a mold right here. This is one of my molds. You get the lid, comes off, you got all the dice molds right there. This is for the custom set of D10s I made for a White Wolf game. So this is 10 D10s, 10-sided dice for role playing. And this mold I've made probably 4 sets of dice with. And they're fun. I don't think I have any here. They're all in storage somewhere. But yeah, you mix the resin and you pour it in here and you pressurize it and all that jazz. So I make Ryan's talking about I make role-playing game dice for role-playing games. And here's this is my main dice bag. This dice bag was made for me by the kids at my 2 daughters' school. And I go in on Thursdays and I run their middle elementary years, so the 4th through 6th year kids. I run a Thursday Dungeons and Dragons campaign for them, which they get to do during the afternoon. And the game is designed to work on the things that they're working on in the classroom during that week. So even though it's a game, they're still working on math skills, communication skills, executive function planning, resource management, like all of these real world skills as they play. And last year, the class made a little dice bag for me, and I can't show you the names, but they all signed the inside of it. It's got a little thing here. You can see all their signatures are in there. So like I'll have this the rest of my life, and I adore it. But inside that dice bag are dice that I've made. So this is a chonk D20 that I've made, and you can't see any of the detail in it because this light sucks balls. But this logo here is a book with a bookmark. You can see it, but that's what's on the 20 side, whatever the high side of the dice is. So on the D20, it's on the 20 side. That was just a regular one. And I also have Adrian themed dice that I made, which have the Jinx Fairy on the 1. Which if you've read AUD, the Jinx Fairy is like the worst possible thing that could happen, right? So here's a 6-sided die, right? And there's your 6. Oop, everything's backwards. There's your 6, right? And then on the other side is an outline of a fairy. She can't really see that, but she's standing with her arms at her side, and the wings are up. And that's just really fun. So you can see it's kind of difficult. This is a different fairy design that we used, which is more like Tinkerbell. I don't know if you can see, the color's not really showing up, but it's literally just, oh, there we go. There's the Tinkerbell. You can see the skirt and the wings and the head. And there's little tiny legs at the bottom. Oop, there we go. See that? Pretty cool, right? This is a barrel D100. It's technically, you can see all the shiny stuff inside, but I made these for myself. These are the dice that I made for my Artificer character that I play in a Tuesday campaign. And what's funny is my aunt, my wife's aunt, my aunt-in-law bought me this Artificer shirt for Christmas, and she didn't even know I played an Artificer, which is fun. So it says, if I cannot do something, I will build something that can, which is what Artificers do in Dungeons & Dragons. So yes, I'm still doing the dice, though I have not done it too terribly regularly. I've made the kids a couple of sets of dice because both of my daughters like to play. And I made gifts for some friends, but I haven't done that much. I'm fully supplied up. I'm still capable. It just hasn't really happened. And eventually I'll probably do some kind of dice for this guy. This is a miniature of Seth from the Undead Glitch. There's a company called Thorn's Tavern that's launching. Their Kickstarter just funded, and I worked with them to create this guy, which is a 3D generated version of Seth from the book. So they took the cover image. I don't have a book with me. It's way on the other side of my office. Oh no. But this is legit dead ass like what he looks like on the cover. And they just used magic and created a miniature for it. So this guy will live on my desk next to my fancy dice bag for eternity, because that's too damn cool. Company's called Thorn's Tavern. I don't think you can get anything from them yet. On the Kickstarter, if you were a backer, you can be part of like the beta wave of figures being made. You get credits to use, that kind of thing. And I don't think that's live yet. But my experience with them is that it was awesome. So, like, I just sent them the cover, and they were like, here's your dude. Oh, wow. And if you go to the Kickstarter, which you can still see, you can go to the project page. You can see they used Seth and the cover of the book. Their Tesser, ooh, that's a great idea. I don't have a good illustration of Tesser though. I could give him the cover, which has like his silhouette, but I don't know what that would actually come out with. But you can do prompts. You can send him an image and then give it like a 2 or 3 sentence prompt, kind of like with ChatGPT or Midjourney, and get some details. So maybe. Because I worked with them, I get some of those beta credits as like an incentive. So that's a great idea. I'll try and mess around with that. I think they have different sizes too, because they sent me a big one of him, but I know you can get regular size minis, which are like, these guys. You can see this is like a standard D&D mini. This is a druid. This is what they call 28 millimeter. And then this is Seth, as you can see, who is significantly bigger. And this guy's, I think, a 54 millimeter miniature. How to deal with in-laws you don't get along with. Man, you could write a lot of books about that. How to practice stoicism. Yes, James. How to practice stoicism. My ex-wife, her family was, for the most part, fine, and I got along with most of her family. Her dad was tough to get along with, though. He was like smarmy and judgy, and it always felt like he didn't like me, and I'm pretty sure he didn't like me. And when she and I split up and were going through the divorce, he gave her counsel that demonized me, which was like pretty disappointing. You know, he was like, "You got to change the locks. He's going to steal all your shit." And I'm like, I just want to get the fuck out of this house. Like, I just don't want to be here. You don't have to change the locks. You just need to stop calling me. And that, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I got along with him, but mostly it was just me sitting there watching him be a dick to other people. And I guess being stoic, but whatever. My wife's family is fantastic. Of course, there's only like two of them, her mom and her aunt, but they're both 10 out of 10 phenomenal people, super loving, caring, and attentive. And I absolutely adore having them in my family. So if either of you see this video, I love you both. But yeah, my family's kind of a shit show. So my wife is probably like, well, you know, that cousin's cool, that aunt's neat, those brothers cool, that sister's not, you know, because I have a huge family. I am the baby of 11, if you haven't heard. Yeah, father-in-laws and mother-in-laws, it's tough, man, because you got to like toe the line and be a good spouse, but also stand up for yourself and your family. It's fucked up. It's weird. It can be really awkward, but it is what it is. So we love the people we love. So I'm probably going to wrap it up here pretty shortly. I'll give it another 15 minutes or so. It's getting late. It's 11 o'clock local, and I'm starting to get a little tired, but we do have a pretty good crowd here. We had a lot of people tonight, which was awesome. And I think a lot of great questions got asked. 11. Yeah, no, so the first 10 were my father with his first wife. So technically they're my half brothers and sisters. And I came much after when my father remarried, which was perhaps a questionable decision because my mom hadn't had any kids and was in her 30s when it happened. And she was like, I want to have a kid. And he was like, all right, you know, we'll do that. And he gave her number 11. But my family doesn't do the half thing. Like, I've never been a half brother, and those aren't my half brothers and sisters. They're just my brothers and sisters. You know, there's never been any kind of, you know, delineation between the two. So when I say I have 6 sisters and 4 brothers, I mean it. I have 6 sisters and 4 brothers. I don't have 6 half sisters and 4 half brothers. They're my brothers and sisters, and they feel the same about me. My dad's first wife, Nellie, was a saint. And I can't even imagine what that was like. I mean, it was obviously a very different time. You know, my family started being born in the 40s, late 40s. I think my oldest brother was born probably around 48, 49, something like that. So, you know, he's almost 80 now. You have some halves and steps. Yep. Yeah, we're just family. It is what it is. Like, everyone's invited to everything, and you're there, you know. And for me, what was kind of cool was I was born 11 years after my closest sibling, which is my sister Candy. So when I rolled in as like a bambino, right, all of my brothers and sisters were pretty much teenagers or adults, and I got a lot of gifts as a kid. Man, that was cool. My Christmas gift selection, I usually got one thing from each brother and one thing from each sister, roughly. But that was like 10 gifts. Just boom, 10 gifts plus whatever, you know, I got from other people. So I had a lot of cool toys growing up, man. I had a lot of GI Joes. I had a lot of Transformers. Oh man, I was toy rich. Ryan, how do I feel about the fourth wall breaking in narrative form? If you can do it, it's really fun, but it significantly changes the tone of a story, and you need to be very aware what the consequences are of doing it. Um, I think I've done it a few times. I do it a lot through innuendo and chapter titles. Like Glitch is a really good example of it, where the titles are speaking to the reader, not as like, okay, this chapter's about this chapter's titled this. It's more like a hey, if you know what this joke is, you know what the chapter's about. They're challenges to the reader or the listener to kind of get the joke and be in on it. So that's kind of fourth wall breaking for me. I don't do a ton of it. I can't really think of any examples offhand. But if you look at stuff like the Deadpool movies, right? The Deadpool comics too, they're incredibly self-aware, and he's a complete nut job, and it works so well because he's crazy, and the fact that he's talking to a fictional audience makes him even more crazy. But it's really funny because he's aware of what's going on, and it just adds so much depth to that character. But you need to have a character that it works with, right? And there are like stories that are like epistolary in nature, which is like journal form or narrative form, where you could have like a historian reflect on the events of a story, which is a lot like World War Z, for example, where it's a series of interviews after the fact, and the narrator is able to interject stuff to the reader, thus breaking the fourth wall, giving them background info that the story doesn't necessarily offer. But yeah, I don't do it a whole lot. You really do got to be careful, because it can just totally change the tenor and mood if you're not careful. But it's really fun to do, or the idea of it's really fun to do, I should say. And again, like the character, it has to work for the character. Like Seth in Glitch, Seth is talking and it's first person, but he's not necessarily talking to you. You're just like experiencing his thought process as he goes through the world and as he describes what experiences he has. And that's different than fourth wall breaking, even though he's essentially talking to the reader or the listener. It's just the style of the writing. Like if he specifically addressed someone, that would be different. And in many ways, like Adrian writing in his journal, who he titles Mr. Journal, when he's addressing Mr. Journal, he is, for all intents and purposes, talking to the reader or the listener. And that's kind of fourth wall breaking, but it's done in the context of the story, because he gives his journal a personality, a fake personality, because he's alone. And it's more mentally beneficial to him to talk to a fictional someone than it is to just write. So he creates this new character of this journal to have a friend, I guess, to have someone to listen to him. He's already got the cat, and the cat doesn't talk back too much. But at least he has Otis the cat. Or Ms. Journal. Yep. He specifically has a crisis at the beginning where he's like, are you a Mrs. Journal? Are you a Mr. Journal? Are you trans journal? What does that mean? And has this like weird self-reflection moment where he's like, what do I do? What do I do? What does that say about me? Casey, is there a real person Adrian is based on? Yeah. Adrian is me. Full stop. The genesis of Adrian is that I was writing the story originally for my friend Joe, and it was written for fun, and it was me surviving that story. Because I was writing it for my best friend, and he's got a kick out of it. But then when we knew the story had legs and we were going to go public with it on the website, I was like, it can't be me. It's got to be a character. And then I overlaid Adrian over me and gave Adrian a different background, a different history, different skill sets. But for all intents and purposes, if you are hanging out with me, you are hanging out with Adrian. Yeah, like I talk like him. His writing his story is just me literally just making shit up as I go, and that's just Adrian. Lots of characters in my stories are based on people, or at the very least named after people. Gilbert from Adrian is basically my dad. A lot of similarities between Gilbert and my dad. And when I wrote Gilbert's dialogue, I tried to think of how my dad would talk in that moment, and like what he would do and how he would handle that kind of situation. Yeah, Michelle and I have actually hung out a couple of times, so she would know. Uh, Gilbert's like my dad. Patty is like one of my sisters. The Air Force pilot Kate, who is shows up with Michelle and Kevin later on in the story. She is directly a coworker that I was working with at the time, who was like, "Can you make a character after me?" And I was like, "Yes, I can. I actually have a perfect one." And yeah, if that's me, I am a funny guy. People say that about me. I am a lot of fun to be around. Thank God. Wildly inappropriate at times and embarrassing to some people, but I am pretty fun to be around. Just got to get your shots first. Who else? Who else? Couple of villains have been patterned after some people, and I won't say names for legal reasons. Uh, who else? Adrian's military experience, which I was not in the military. I did do bodyguard work and security detail work and site security, but that's not the same thing as being in the military. Uh, a lot of his experiences are direct lifts from stories that my friends and family told me. Because they would tell these stories when I was around, and it was like, wow, that's fucking crazy. How did that happen? And when I was writing Adrian, I went to those people and I was like, hey, I really want to have that thing that happened to you be part of his history as well. Do you mind if I kind of use that? And will you tell me more so I can make it authentic? And a lot of the stories that Adrian tells about the time that he was in the Army are just direct lifts from stuff that happened to friends or family of mine. My dad was in the Army. Several of my uncles were in the Army. I had a brother that was in the Army who's in MACV-SOG in Vietnam. And I had a brother at the same time who was in the Marines in Vietnam. And then 2 or 3 of the guys that I graduated high school with went into various branches of the military. One of my best friends, who I'm actually hanging out with tomorrow, Brent, was in the Army. He retired out of the Army just this year, 20 years. And they would tell me these stories, and it was just like crazy. Colony Lost. If you haven't read or listened to Colony Lost, please do so. It's dedicated to a unit called the Blue Spaders, who were, and I might say this wrong, but hopefully you get the intention, but they were the most wounded unit in the military in Iraq. They lost the most amount of members and had the most amount of serious injuries. And the book was dedicated to them because I had the privilege of spending a lot of time with those guys at a charity event for wounded warriors called Operation First Response down in Philadelphia. And it's a really wonderful charity for veterans. If you want to support a charity for veterans, I highly recommend you give them money because they're such good people and they do such good stuff. But I was able to go down there and be a part of their big fundraising event, and I got to stay at the hotel that the majority of their veteran guests were staying at, and I got to spend a weekend with those guys. And there were a couple of nights where we all sat down in the lobby of the hotel, and the hotel we were staying at actually had beer taps in the lobby, and we just sat there drinking cheap beer all night long. And they just told all these insane stories about what they went through and what they saw. And it wasn't just the Blue Spaders. Like, there was Air Force guys there. There was a couple of SEALs. And they talked about these incredible experiences. And I remember sitting at this table being like, I can't believe I'm part of this conversation. And I got nothing to offer, right? I'm like, yeah, I make shit up for a living. Hey. And I've been through some scary stuff doing security, but not not like what they went through, nothing even remotely close. And my buddy JB, who I met through Operation First Response, who I was there that night with, he and I immediately just hit it off as friends. And he made an idle comment to me at one point. He was like, "You should write a book about us, like a nonfiction book about what happened." And I was like, that's a lot of responsibility, because I wouldn't want to get that wrong. And I was working on Colony Lost at the time. I had just started writing it. And I said, what if I put some of you guys in the book? What if I named some people in the book after people who were in the Blue Spaders and kind of paid them, some tribute in that way? And he was like, "Yeah, dude, do it. That's cool." So in the front of Colony Lost, the dedication is to them. And many of the characters in that book are named after and based on dudes who I hung out with at Operation First Response. So, like, for example, and this is a racist word, but there's a character, an Asian character in Colony Lost, whose nickname is Ping Pong. And the real guy who inspired that character, his name is Jay. He's an Asian guy. He was in the Army, and his nickname in the unit was Ping Pong. And it was racist as shit. And he did not care because they were, family. When you're deployed like that, it's just different. And when I was writing the book, he was like, "You can do it, but you got to call me Ping Pong. Like, you can't just call me Jay." And I was like, "That's racist as shit." Like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, "Well, if you want me, do it that way." So there's a character in that book named Ping Pong, and he's Asian. And I in the disclaimer, I'm like, "Hey, they've got the nicknames they asked for, the nicknames they really had. So please understand that I'm not being racist, but I'm paying them tribute." Was I taking mental notes or dictate while they tell me stories? I take mental notes. I have a memory for that stuff. Like, when I hear those stories, they just right in. I mean, that's the storyteller piece of my personality, where when I hear a story and I like it or it's important, it just sticks. So, and I was able to follow up after the fact, where it's like, "Oh yeah, a guy named Austin told me this crazy story about an IED going off on a patrol he was on." And I'm still in touch with Austin, and I was able to reach out to him, and he and I went out to dinner with his wife, and I had like a 3-hour long conversation with just them about it. And it was a hard conversation for him to have, and it was a hard conversation to listen to. But it was important for me that if I was going to talk about his story, I needed to get it right. And in the long run, it was important to him because he got to get the story off of his chest. And even though it was fictionalized in a book, people were able to read it and absorb it and glean some level of the experience that he had. So hopefully some people out there garnered empathy for him and men and women like him. So ultimately, it was a very cathartic experience for him. It was an honor for me. And there's lots of people who show up in the books like that. My buddy JB also showed up as a character named Jay in AUD, who's that's kind of a secondary character that shows up sometime around book 10, and he's in 2 or 3 of the books. So, but yeah, that's a very long answer for a very short question. Yes, there are many people who show up in my stories. Taking that a step further, there are many places that are real that show up in my stories. Anything that's set in the real world, where I'm talking about a real world location, obviously that's real. Adrian's story is set in town, a fictional town, in a state that I never mentioned, near a city called Westfield, which exists in like almost every state. So the location of Adrian's story is kind of unspoken. And there, if you pay enough attention and you read between the lines, there's a pretty small area of the country that I can actually be in. But town in that story is based on a town in New Hampshire. The layout, the locations, a lot of the stores that he talks about are all real in that town. The geography is the same in the town. But I've never said what town. and I never will. Also, Alpa, the school that Adrian shelters at, is based on a real school. Um, and the school was a big part of the inspiration to write that story, because it was like, damn, this place would be great to live in to survive the apocalypse. Hey. So, Felicia, Abigail is your favorite. Yeah, Abby is one of my favorite characters as well. Brian, for someone who has never read a lit RPG, can you dumb down what to expect? Okay, great question. First and foremost, it's my writing. So if you've never read lit RPG, you're still going to get a Chris Philbrook story. Okay, so know that going into it. Lit RPG as a genre is, and this is very broad strokes, is essentially a book that takes place inside a gamified setting where the person is playing a game, like a role playing game where they have a character and there's stories happening and quests and whatnot around them, or they're placed into a situation where reality is codified like a game. So, you unlock abilities by doing certain things, or you travel to different places to earn stuff, and you loot things, and there's items, and sometimes you get powers and whatnot. So you are experiencing a character experiencing a game. So, for a video game example, it would be like, if the lit RPG was fantasy, it would be like a character in, let's say, Skyrim, right? You would be reading a book about the actions and experiences of a character playing Skyrim. And part of that story would also be talking about the game mechanics of what's happening to that character as they go. And then not all lit RPGs have a ton of game mechanics. Some have just a little, some are in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle. Because as a game developer, like, it's really fun for me to invent this system. So in Glitch, Seth is inside this virtual reality environment playing this game, and he has a character. He has a class, just like you would in most role-playing video games or tabletop games. And as he moves around this zombie apocalypse and uses skills inside the game, his skill points go up and he gets more skilled and winds up being more successful when he uses those skills. And as he fights and he levels up the skills associated with the different kinds of weapons, his skill numbers go up and he gets better at using those weapons. And when he uses weapons that he doesn't have the skill in, he isn't effective with them until he continues to practice those skills and they get better. And then each of the classes that are available to him have like a set number of like powers that are associated with them. And because this is a zombie apocalypse story, the powers are more like, inspirational or luck based or toughness based. They're not like you're casting spells like you would be in like The Witcher or something like that. So Seth's initial class is not a good one. He picks it by accident, and it's called Persuader. And it's essentially a very social class. It's meant for like bartering and seduction and convincing people and dissuading people. It's all about like mental manipulation. And he's like, what the shit am I going to do to zombies? Like, none of these powers are going to work at all ever. And part of his struggle is he gets shafted with this class and a set of abilities that don't appear useful at all. But then he starts to think about it and is like, okay, wait a minute. If I can do this to that, then I can try this. And he has to kind of like reinvent the wheel and figure out how to make a initially useless class be very useful. And that's basically lit RPG. You see this character progress through the story. You watch them get more powerful and more skilled in a numbered, documented way, so you can keep track of like how they're doing. And that's kind of the gist of it. And the way I wrote Glitch is that the game stuff is kind of lumped together, right? So there'll be a paragraph where it's just game stuff. And if that does not interest you, don't read it. You don't need it. The story is still the story. You can skip over the numbers. And if you're listening, you can hit the shoot ahead 10 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever the Audible app has. And just gloss right over that paragraph, because you do not need to know the numbers for the story to be good. it is cool when you hear what the abilities can do, right? Because like as he unlocks new abilities and he gets titles and achievements and stuff like that, he can do progressively more cool and crazy things in the game. And when he loots an item, right, that has cool properties, you can see how it interacts with other skills and abilities he has, which is fun from like a gamey, crunchy math number standpoint. But you don't need to know it, right? Like if he loots a hatchet, you know what he's got. Does the hatchet have special properties that make it cool? Sure, but at the end of the day, it's a hatchet, right? You know where the story's going, and that's lit RPG. There's other variations of it. There's progression fantasy, which has way less game mechanics, like no mechanics at all. It's also a fantasy. There's no sci-fi, and then there's game lit, which is lit RPG, but significantly less game statistics, but still like leveling and quests and stuff like that. Lit RPG is a little bit more game mechanics oriented, which again, as a former game developer, that was really fun to write. So the other kind of fun thing about Undead Glitch is a central part of the story is classes, the classes that are available. Seth's initial choice, accidental choice of Persuader, leaves him with an initial skill set that he believes to be subpar and borderline useless. And a core part of his like quests in the game is to find how to get new classes. And you have to find the trainer for the class. So there's a person somewhere in the game environment who, if he goes to, he can do a quest for that person or a series of quests. And if he completes them successfully, he is granted a new class and all of the abilities that come with it. And there's 12 core classes in the game. And when you start to get combinations of classes, you unlock like ultra classes. And they're called empowered classes. And the empowered classes are fun. So, I don't want to give them away, but in the glossary of Glitch, when you get the print version or the Kindle version, there's a whole list of all the fun things. But the empowered classes are like jokes, and they get abilities based on the classes that feed into it, right? So Persuader is the one that Seth has, and then he winds up getting a class called Cut Up, which is like a social blade master, right? Where he's like cracking jokes and taunting people and slashing things, right? So he starts working on that skill set. And Persuader and Jester don't unlock anything special, but then he gets a third class, and the three of those wind up unlocking a special class, like Wasteland Survivor kind of stuff. And I don't want to give it away because the new classes are a big part of like, the crazy abilities he gets are pretty fun down the line. But there's a lot of ones. There's a lot of callbacks to the 80s and the 90s and old video game culture. And, it's on like Donkey Kong kind of stuff. So if you're into that kind of stuff, the book is a slam dunk, fun experience. And again, it's a story I wrote. Like, it's me. You know what my characters are like. If you've read or listened to me, the kind of plots I write, the stories, how I write action, how I write intrigue, and it's still me. It's not that different. So on that note, I'm going to go to bed because it's 11:30 here and I need to be semi-functional tomorrow. I'm going to visit friends. For everyone who has joined me tonight, and there have been quite a few, this is the biggest live chat I've had in a long time. Thank you so much. I think I'm doing one or two more of these before the book releases on the 7th. One of them is on the 7th, so I can kind of talk to everybody on the day it releases, and hopefully some people will have read or listened to a good chunk of the book by the time I jump on in the evening on the 7th, so I can talk to you guys live about it. Super, super, super excited. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for the questions. And, as always, I'm available. Might take me a day or two to get back to you, but if you ever need to reach out to me, just, grab me on social media somewhere. Instagram or Facebook is the best. I am on TikTok, but don't check it regularly. I'm on Instagram, which I get my messages forwarded to me. So have a great night. Reach out if you have questions. It's always